Hello everyone, it's Lola again, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make Jamaican beef patties, or the Jamaican meat pies as some would like to call it. So let's get started with the list of ingredients we are going to be using for this recipe. Green onions, some breadcrumbs, diced onions, some ground beef, salt to taste, curry powder, paprika, allspice, vegetable oil, some diced habanero pepper, thyme, black pepper, minced garlic. I will also be using a little bit of bouillon powder. This is actually very optional, but I usually like to use this because I like that umami flavor it adds to the filling. So to start with, I'm going to be preheating some oil inside my pan, and once the oil is hot, I'm going to be adding the diced onion. Then I'm going to be stir frying this until the onions become translucent. At this point, I'm also going to be stirring in the diced garlic, followed by the diced habanero pepper. Then I'm also going to be stirring in the green onions. Once the onion becomes very translucent, then it's time to add the ground beef. So while you are browning the ground beef, make sure you use your wooden spoon to break it apart very well, because you don't want everything to be clumped up together. At this point, as you can see, the ground beef is well browned, and the next thing I'm going to be adding is the breadcrumbs, followed by thyme, curry powder, black pepper, allspice, paprika, salt to taste, and my seasoning powder. Then I'm going to be mixing everything together until all this is well combined. It's now time to cook this meat thoroughly, and I'm going to be adding a little bit of water at this point. Stir it together thoroughly and cover it up. Then leave it to cook for about 10 minutes or until all the water is almost absorbed by the meat. The beef is now done, and if you look closely, you are going to see that it's very moist, and that is the way we want it. We don't want it dry. So I'm going to be leaving this aside to cool down while I prepare our dough. For the dough, I'm going to be using 2 teaspoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of turmeric powder, 12 to 14 tablespoons of water, 1 cup of very cold butter, that is 2 sticks of butter, and 4 cups of all-purpose flour. Now let's put all this together. Today I'm going to be using a food processor, but you can definitely use your fingers to do this. I'm going to be adding my all-purpose flour to the food processor, followed by the turmeric powder, the sugar, the salt, and of course the butter. Now I'm going to be using the pulse button of my food processor to process this until everything comes together and becomes very crumbly. Now, if you look closely, you can see the flour is now very crumbly. The next thing I'm going to be doing right now is to add the water a little bit at a time until the dough is formed. I'll also be using the food processor to do this. It makes the work quite easy. But as I said earlier, you can use your fingers to just mix everything together. All you have to do is to rub the butter inside the flour. After some time, it will become crumbly. Then you can start adding the water and form your dough. You don't want to over process the dough, otherwise it will become too stretchy. Now the dough is formed, and I'm going to be taking it out from the food processor. As you can see, this dough is not too hard and it's not too soft. That is the exact texture we want. So at this point, I'm going to be transferring this dough inside my glass bowl. I'll just knead it for about 30 seconds to 1 minute. Then I'm going to transfer it into a plastic bag. I'm using this twistable plastic bags, anyone will do. And I'm going to be transferring this to the fridge to rest for about 20 minutes or thereabouts. And you can also leave this to rest for a little longer. It's all well and good. In fact, the longer the better. So our dough has been resting for about 20 minutes now, but before I bring it out, I'm going to be preparing my egg wash. And this is 1 egg with about 2 tablespoons of water. I'm going to whisk this together and I'll set it aside. Now at this point, I'm going to be working with half of the dough, and while I'm working with the half, I'll leave the other half in the fridge so it doesn't come to room temperature. So when working with the Jamaican patties, it's very good to have a very thin crust. Unlike the Nigerian meat pie, which can be flexible, you can have it thick or thin. So I'm going to roll this out as thin as I want it. The dough has been well rolled out to my satisfaction. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my pie cutter, and you can use any circular objects around the house to cut out the dough. I'll now be taking the cut out dough one at a time. I'm going to be filling it with about 2 tablespoons of the filling. You can use a little more or less depending on your preference, but try not to overfill the dough, otherwise you're going to find it hard to close it up. Once that is done, I'm going to be dipping my pointing finger inside water, and I will use that to rub around the edges of the dough. You don't want to use too much water, that is why I'm using my finger and not a brush. Now fold over the dough to cover up the filling. Once that is done, I'm going to be using a fork to crimp the edges of the dough. If the fork is becoming sticky, feel free to dip it inside the water, then continue crimping the edges. Once the pie is well sealed, the next thing to do is to transfer it into your pan. And here I've got my pan lined with a parchment paper. It's going to allow the underside of the pie to cook well without burning the pie. The next thing to do before transferring this pie into the oven is to brush it with the egg wash we made earlier on, and make sure the pie is well coated with the egg wash before putting it inside the oven. This will allow the crust to come out really golden. At this point, I'm going to be putting this inside my 375 degrees preheated oven, and I'll be leaving it to cook for about 25 to 30 minutes until it's well cooked and the top crust is golden brown. Now the pie is done. As you can see, it came out so beautiful, and at this point I'm going to be bringing it out of the oven to cool before we proceed to the next thing, which is eating the pie. But before we eat the pie, I just want to show you how it looks on the inside. Here we go. Isn't that beautiful? So that is it again for today. Thank you all for spending your time with me. The full ingredients for today's recipe can be found at afropotluck.com, and the link to that is also in the description box below. Until next time, I'll talk to you shortly. Enjoy.